Chapter 1. The dying stranger's last wished. Rain fell like judgment over the city, turning cobblestones into mirrors that reflected nothing but gray sky and darker intentions. Elena pressed herself against the crumbling brick wall of the alley, her wedding dress, if the second-hand ivory slip could be called that, clinging to her skin like a sodden ghost. She had run 3 blocks from the registry office, her shoes abandoned somewhere between betrayal and survival. Behind her, Marcus's voice still echoed, "You really thought I'd marry you? A woman with nothing?" This was about the insurance money, sweetheart. Always was. The rain washed away her tears before they could fall. Perhaps that was mercy. She had sold everything: her grandmother's ring, her books, the last photograph of her parents, to pay for a wedding that was never meant to happen. The plan had been simple, desperately simple: marry Marcus, escape the debt collectors circling her late father's gambling losses, start over. Instead, she had nothing, less than nothing. The collectors would come by morning. Elena leaned her head back against the wet brick and laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. 26 years old, and she had nothing left to lose. Dying in the rain seems rather melodramatic, don't you think? The voice cut through the downpour like velvet over steel. Elena's head snapped up, her heart lurching into her throat. A man stood at the mouth of the alley, impossibly still despite the storm. He wore a black coat that seemed to drink in the dim light, his dark hair wet against a face that could have been carved from marble, beautiful in the way that ancient statues were beautiful, cold and perfect and utterly inhuman. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, pale gray, almost silver, and fixed on her with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. "I'm not dying," Elena managed, though her voice shook. "Just regrouping." His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "In a wedding dress, in a storm, in an alley known for housing the city's least savory residents." He tilted his head, studying her. "Forgive me. I see now you're engaged in very strategic regrouping." Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the absolute ruin of her life, Elena felt a flicker of something that might have been amusement. "Are you here to rob me? Because I can save you the trouble. I have approximately nothing. I can see that." He took a step closer, moving with a grace that seemed wrong somehow, too fluid, too deliberate. "What I cannot see is why a woman would wear a wedding dress to her own drowning. I wasn't invited to change first." The words came out sharper than she intended. "My almost husband was too busy explaining that our marriage was a con. Apparently, I'm very gullible." "Good to know." Something flickered across his pale features, recognition, perhaps, or memory. He moved closer still, and Elena noticed 2 things at once. First, that he cast no reflection in the puddles between them, and second, that he was breathing far too slowly for someone standing in freezing rain. "So you have nothing," he said quietly, "and no one." It wasn't a question. Elena lifted her chin anyway, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her breaking. "Is this the part where you offer to help? Because I've had enough of men's help for one lifetime." No, his gray eyes held hers, and she felt the weight of centuries in that gaze, though she couldn't have said why. "This is the part where I make you an offer. A transaction, if you will. Clean and clear, with terms we both understand." Elena should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But the rain was cold, her dress was ruined, and she had nowhere left to go. "What kind of offer?" He smiled then, fully, and she saw his teeth were too white, too sharp. "I am dying," he said simply. "Truly dying. Not melodramatically drowning in alleys. I have perhaps hours, maybe a day. And there is a tradition among my family that requires certain rites be observed before death. One of those rites is marriage." Elena stared at him. "You want to marry me?" "I want to complete a ritual that requires a mortal bride." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, impossibly dry despite the rain. "This is a contract. You marry me tonight. You witness my death, and you inherit everything I own. My estate, my accounts, my holdings. Enough money to solve whatever problems drove you into this alley. That's insane." "Yes." He held out the paper. But you're here, in a wedding dress, with nothing to lose. And I'm here, running out of time, with no other options. Sometimes insanity is just efficiency wearing a different coat. Elena's hand trembled as she took the paper. The ink was dark red too dark to be proper ink, and the words were written in a script that seemed to move in the corner of her vision. The terms were simple: marriage before midnight, attendance at his deathbed, inheritance of his complete estate upon his passing. No consummation required. No further obligations. A T. The bottom was a single line for her signature, and a space for her blood. Blood? She whispered. Family tradition, he said lightly. We're very old-fashioned about contracts. She should have run. She should have thrown the paper in his beautiful, inhuman face and run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. Instead, Elena heard herself ask, "What's your name?" "Cassius." He pronounced it carefully, as if the name were older than the language they were speaking. "Cassius Thorne. And you are?" "Elena." She looked down at the contract, at the impossible offer, at the last exit from a life that had already ended. "Elena Cross." "Well then, Elena Cross." Cassius extended his hand, palm up, and she saw the ring he held, silver and ancient, set with a stone that gleamed like frozen moonlight. "Will you marry a dying stranger and wake up a wealthy widow?" The rain fell harder. The night grew colder. And Elena, who had nothing left to lose, placed her hand in his. His skin was ice, his grip was iron, and when she nodded, his smile was full of teeth and secrets and something that looked almost like relief. "Excellent," Cassius murmured. "Let's go sign our souls away, shall we?" Chapter 2. The Threshold of Shadows. The car that arrived was older than any vehicle Elena had ever seen, still functioning, a sleek black thing with running boards and windows tinted so dark they might have been painted. The driver never emerged, never spoke. The door simply opened and Cassius gestured for her to enter. Elena hesitated at the edge of the alley, her bare feet cold against the wet stone. "Where exactly are we going?" "My home." Cassius slid into the car with that unnatural grace, settling into the leather seat as if it had been made for him. Perhaps it had. "The ceremony must be conducted properly with witnesses. And you'll want dry clothes before you catch your death." His mouth quirked. "That particular fate should be reserved for me alone tonight." The interior of the car was warmer than it should have been, smelling of old leather and something Elena couldn't quite name, spices. Maybe, or incense from a country that no longer existed. She pulled her wet dress close and tried not to think about how her life had become a series of increasingly terrible decisions. The city fell away behind them as they drove, the cramped streets giving way to wider avenues, then to roads lined with iron gates and old growth trees. The rain softened to mist. Elena watched Cassius from the corner of her eye, cataloging the wrongness of him, the way he never blinked, the absolute stillness of his chest, the pallor of his skin that seemed to glow faintly in the car's dim interior. "You're not human," she said finally. Not a question. Cassius turned those silver eyes on her, and she saw something like approval flicker there. "No, stopped being human a very long time ago." "How long?" "Long enough that I remember when the city was marshland and prayer." He looked out the window at the passing mansions, each one larger and older than the last. "Long enough to be tired." Elena Cross. The car turned through gates that opened without touch, down a drive lined with bare trees that seemed to lean in toward the vehicle like supplicants. At the end of the drive stood a house that made Elena's breath catch. Not a house, an estate. Gothic and sprawling, built from gray stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight, with towers that pierced the clearing sky and windows like watching eyes. "This is yours?" Elena whispered. "For now." Cassius opened the door and stepped out, then offered his hand. "Soon it will be yours, along with everything else I've accumulated over the centuries." Centuries. The word hung in the air between them. Elena took his hand, still cold, still iron strong, and let him help her from the car. The moment her feet touched the ground, she felt it, a vibration in her bones, a pressure against her skin, as if the house itself were aware of her presence and weighing her worth. The massive front doors opened before they reached them, revealing a woman who looked to be in her 50s. Silver-haired and severe, in a black dress that might have been a uniform or might have been mourning. Her eyes dark and sharp as a crow's swept over Elena's ruined wedding dress with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "Mrs. Vale," Cassius said softly. Prepare the drawing room. And find Miss Cross something suitable to wear. The drawing room, sir? Mrs. Vale's voice carried centuries of disapproval. Are you certain? I am dying, Vale. Certainty is all I have left. Cassius moved past her into an entrance hall so vast Elena could have fit her entire former apartment in it 3 times over. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, and everywhere candles. Hundreds of them, burning in silver candelabras, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their flames. Mrs. Vale's gaze fixed on Elena. Come with me, girl. You can't meet the house looking like a drowned rat. The house? Elena followed the older woman up the staircase, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. What house? Mrs. Vale paused at the landing, her expression softening fractionally. Poor lamb. You don't know anything, do you? She resumed walking, leading Elena down a corridor lined with portraits of pale, beautiful people whose eyes seemed to follow their movement. House Thorne, one of the old families. The oldest, some say, though House Corvus disputes that. I don't understand. You will, Mrs. Vale opened a door into a bedroom that could have housed a small family. A fire burned in the massive hearth, and laid out on the 4-poster bed was a dress deep burgundy, velvet, with sleeves that would fall to her wrists and a neckline that promised modesty. Dry yourself. Dress. I'll return in 10 minutes. Elena stood alone in the firelit room, her mind spinning. She should leave. She should run down that staircase and out those gates and never look back. But she thought of the contract in her pocket, of the signature space that required her blood, of Cassius's words, enough money to solve whatever problems drove you into this alley. Her father's debts were crushing. The collectors were patient in the way that wolves were patient, and Cassius was dying. He'd said so himself. What harm could there be in witnessing a death, if it meant survival? Elena peeled off the wet wedding dress that had been meant for Marcus and let it fall to the floor. She would burn it later, if she got the chance. For now, she dried herself by the fire and pulled on the burgundy dress. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, which was impossible. Everything about this night was impossible. Mrs. Vale returned exactly 10 minutes later with soft leather slippers and a comb. She worked through Elena's tangled hair with surprising gentleness, her hands quick and practiced. You seem kind, Elena said quietly. So tell me the truth. What am I walking into? Mrs. Vale's hands stilled. In the mirror above the vanity, her reflection met Elena's eyes. A wedding, child, and a funeral, and a binding that will change everything you are, she resumed, combing, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. But perhaps that's what you need. Perhaps that's what you both need. I don't understand. You will, Mrs. Vale repeated. Before this night is over, you will understand everything. She led Elena back down the stairs to a drawing room, where Cassius waited, changed into formal black. Surrounded by candles and 3 other figures who turned as one when Elena entered, their eyes were all the same shade of silver, their smiles were all too sharp, and Elena realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that she had not agreed to witness a death. She had agreed to something far stranger, and far more binding, than any mortal marriage. Chapter 3. The ceremony of blood. The 3 figures stood in a half-circle around Cassius, and Elena's first coherent thought was that they looked like variations on a theme: beautiful, pale, predatory. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark, formal wear that seemed to predate modern fashion by decades, perhaps centuries. The woman stepped forward first. She was tall and willowy, with hair like spun gold and eyes that assessed Elena the way a jeweler might assess a questionable stone. This is your bride, Cassius? A mortal refugee in a ruined dress? I've changed, Elena said, before she could stop herself, lifting her chin. The dress? I mean, though I suppose refugee is accurate enough. The woman's lips curved. She has spine. How unexpected. Serafini, Cassius said quietly, and there was warning in his tone. May I present Elena Cross, my intended. Elena, these are members of House Thorne. Serafini serves as the housekeeper of records. Dorian, he gestured to a dark-haired man who looked barely older than Elena herself, is our youngest council member. And Nathaniel, the 3rd figure, silver-haired and ancient-eyed, has witnessed more binding ceremonies than anyone living or unliving. Nathaniel murmured, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. Tell me, Miss Cross, do you come to this binding of your own free will? Elena's mouth went dry. Binding? I thought this was a marriage. It is, Cassius said. Among other things. What other things? Serafini laughed. The sound like breaking glass. Oh, she truly doesn't know. Cassius? You wicked thing. You haven't told her? Told me what? Elena looked between them, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. The room suddenly felt smaller, the candlelight more oppressive. What haven't you told me? Cassius's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in those silver eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or resignation. That I am not merely dying. I am transitioning. The human would say turning, but that's crude. What's happening to me is more precise. Turning into what? Into what I've always been, only more so. He moved closer, and Elena fought the urge to step back. I am vampire, Elena. We all are. And I am old enough that my body has begun to shut down, to enter what we call the long sleep. Most of my kind die during the transition, but there is a way to survive it, an ancient rite that requires a mortal bride freely given, to anchor the soul through the change. The words hit Elena like physical blows. Vampire, transition, anchor the soul. You lied to me, she whispered. I told you I was dying. That wasn't a lie. Cassius's voice remained gentle, infuriatingly gentle. I told you there was a ritual, that my family required certain traditions. Also true. I simply omitted certain details. You omitted that you're a monster. Yes. He didn't flinch. I did. Because I am desperate, Elena Cross, and desperation makes liars of us all. You needed money. I needed a bride. We both needed a way out of our respective prisons. Elena's hand went to her pocket, to the contract she'd signed in the alley. What happens if I walk away right now? Nathaniel spoke, his voice like aged whiskey. The contract is blood signed, but not yet sealed. You could walk away. Cassius would die. The house would collapse without its elder. And you? He paused, considering. You would return to your debts, your collectors, your ruined life. But you would be free of us. How generous, Elena said bitterly. We are not known for our generosity, Serafini agreed. But Cassius has always had a soft spot for strays, Serafini. Cassius's tone sharpened. Enough. Elena stood in the center of the room, surrounded by vampires, actual vampires, and tried to think past her panic. Her life was already destroyed. Marcus had seen to that. The debt collectors would come at dawn, and she had nothing to offer them except her own ruin. But this was different. This was choosing to bind herself to creatures who drank blood, who cast no reflections, who lived for centuries while the world changed around them. If I do this, she heard herself say, if I complete this ritual, what happens to me? You become my wife, Cassius said simply. In the eyes of the house, in the eyes of human law, you inherit my estate, my wealth, my protection. And when I wake from the long sleep, if I wake, you will be free to remain or leave as you choose. And if you don't wake, then you are a very wealthy widow, and the house will have no further claim on you. Elena looked at each of them and turned these beautiful, terrible things that shouldn't exist. Serafini watched her with cool amusement. Dorian had the grace to look uncomfortable. Nathaniel simply waited, patient as stone, and Cassius looked at her with something that might have been hope, or might have been hunger. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. The ceremony, Elena said slowly. What does it involve? Words, Nathaniel said. Vows spoken in the old tongue. An exchange of blood, yours and his, mixed and sealed. And your presence during his transition, which will last 3 days and 3 nights. My blood, a few drops only. Cassius held up his hand, and she saw the ring he'd shown her in the alley gleaming on his finger. Mixed with mine, sealed with this ring. It creates a bond temporary, unless you choose otherwise later. Enough to anchor me through the change. And during these 3 days, what will you be? Dying, he said simply, and being reborn. It's not pleasant to witness. You don't have to stay for all of it, only the beginning and the end. Elena thought of her apartment, emptied by debt, of Marcus's cruel laughter, of her father's legacy of ruin, of standing in the rain with nothing and no one, drowning on dry land. "I'll do it," she said, and watched relief flood Cassius's marble features. "But I want something added to the contract." Serafini's eyebrows rose. "Mortals don't negotiate with House Thorn. This one does." Elena met Cassius's eyes. "I want your word, your actual word. Whatever that means to your kind, that you will not feed from me without my explicit consent. Not during the ceremony. Not during your transition. Not ever. If this bond requires my blood, I give it freely for the ritual. But my body is mine." "Agreed?" Silence fell over the drawing room. Then Cassius smiled, truly smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost human. "Agreed," he said. "You have my word, Elena Cross. Your blood is yours alone." "Then let's begin." Chapter 4. The bond of silver and blood. Nathaniel moved to the center of the drawing room, where a small table had been prepared. Elena hadn't noticed it before. Draped in black velvet and set with items that made her throat tighten. A silver chalice. A ceremonial blade with a handle carved from bone. 2 candles burning with flames that seemed too red to be natural. "The ritual is ancient," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a formal cadence. "Older than any nation currently standing. It was created when vampires first learned that the long sleep could be survived, that a mortal soul could serve as lighthouse for those lost in the dark waters of transformation." Elena stepped closer, her legs steadier than she'd expected. "And how many mortals have survived being that lighthouse?" "All of them," Cassius said quietly. "The danger is to me, not to you. Your role is simply to hold the thread that lets me find my way back." "Comforting," Elena murmured. But she took her place beside him at the table. Serafini and Dorian moved to stand behind Cassius, witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. Mrs. Vale appeared in the doorway. Her severe face softened slightly in the candlelight. She nodded once to Elena, and it felt like approval, or perhaps sympathy. Nathaniel lifted the blade. "We begin with words. Cassius Thorn, do you enter this binding of your own will, with full knowledge of its weight and consequence?" "I do." Cassius's voice was steady. "Elena Cross, do you enter this binding of your own will, with full knowledge that you tie yourself to one of the endless night?" Elena swallowed. "I do." "Then speak your vows." Cassius, as the dying speaks first. Cassius turned to face her fully. And Elena was struck again by the inhuman beauty of him, the kind of beauty that belonged in museums, in paintings, in myths, whispered around fires. He took her hands, his skin still impossibly cold. "I, Cassius Thorn of House Thorn, born in darkness and bound by blood, take you, Elena Cross, as witness to my ending and my beginning. I offer you my protection, my wealth, and my word that no harm shall come to you by my hand or my hunger. I bind myself to you until death or whatever lies beyond it parts us." The words settled over the room like snow, heavy and strange. Elena realized she was trembling. Nathaniel turned to her. "Now the mortal speaks. Repeat after me. I, Elena Cross. I, Elena Cross," Elena whispered, then found her voice. "I, Elena Cross, of no house and no inheritance, born in daylight and bound by necessity." She paused. That wasn't the script Nathaniel had given her, but it was the truth. "I take you, Cassius Thorn, as whatever you need me to be. I offer my presence, my witness, and my promise that I will not abandon you to the darkness. I bind myself to you until this ritual is complete, or until you release me, whichever comes first." Serafini made a small sound, surprise perhaps, or approval. Cassius's fingers tightened on hers. "Until I release you," he repeated softly. "I accept those terms." Nathaniel lifted the chalice. "Then we seal it in the old way, with blood freely given, mixed and bound." He held out the blade to Cassius first. Without hesitation, Cassius drew the blade across his palm. His blood welled up darker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight, and dripped into the chalice. The scent of it hit Elena like a wave, copper and spices and something else, something that made her head swim. Then Nathaniel turned to her, offering the blade handle first. Elena's hand shook as she took it. The bone was warm, almost alive in her grip. She looked at her palm, at the lines there that were supposed to tell her future, and wondered what fortune teller could have predicted this moment. Freely given, she whispered, and drew the blade across her skin. The pain was sharp but brief. Her blood bright red, so human compared to his, dripped into the chalice, mixing with Cassius's darker essence. The two bloods swirled together, and Elena could have sworn she saw light pulse from the mixture, brief and silver as moonlight. Nathaniel lifted the chalice. Drink, he commanded. Both of you. Seal the bond. Cassius took the chalice first, his eyes never leaving Elena's face as he drank. When he lowered it, his lips were stained dark, and something in his expression had shifted, become more focused, more present, as if he'd been half asleep before, and was only now fully awake. He offered the chalice to Elena. She stared at the mixture of their blood, at the impossible thing she was about to do. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but she had come this far. She had signed the contract, spoken the vows. Cut her palm open. Elena lifted the chalice and drank. The taste was nothing like she'd expected, not copper, not salt, but something rich and dark and utterly foreign. It burned down her throat like expensive wine, spreading warmth through her chest, her limbs, her fingertips. She gasped, and Cassius's hand steadied her elbow. Easy, he murmured. The bond takes a moment to settle. Settle was an understatement. Elena felt as if something fundamental had shifted inside her, as if a door had opened in a room she hadn't known existed. And through that door, she could feel him, Cassius, his presence like a cold flame at the edge of her consciousness. Distinct and undeniable. I can feel you, she whispered, and I you. Cassius's voice held wonder. Your warmth, your life. He trailed off, something like pain crossing his features. It's been so long since I felt anything like it. Nathaniel took the chalice back and set it on the table. The bond is sealed. Elena Cross, you are now Elena Thorne, wife and anchor. The house recognizes the binding. He looked at Cassius, his ancient eyes grave. And now, Cassius Thorne, you must begin your descent. The transition will not wait much longer. As if, in response to his words, Cassius swayed. Elena caught him instinctively, shocked by how much weight he suddenly carried, how his perfect control seemed to crack all at once. The room upstairs, he managed. Mrs. Vale knows I'll get her there, Mrs. Vale said, already moving toward them. Come, child. He needs to be in the sealed chamber before the true dying begins. Elena let herself be guided, half supporting Cassius as they moved toward the stairs. Behind them, she heard Serafini's voice, unusually quiet. She accepted modified terms. Did you see? She negotiated, and Dorian's response, maybe that's exactly what he needs. Someone who won't simply obey. Elena didn't have time to process their words. Cassius's weight increased with every step, his skin growing colder still, his breathing already slow, becoming barely perceptible. Stay with me, she found herself whispering. Just stay with me a little longer. Through the bond, she felt his response, wordless but clear. A promise, or perhaps a plea. I'm trying. Chapter 5. The sealed chamber room Mrs. Vale led them to was at the top of the east tower. Behind a door carved with symbols Elena couldn't read, spirals and crescents and words in a language that predated anything she'd learned in school. The door was reinforced with silver bands, and when Mrs. Vale pushed it open, Elena felt the air change, grow heavier, as if the room itself had been waiting. Inside, the space was circular, windowless, lit only by candles set in alcoves around the stone walls. At the center stood a bed draped in black silk, surrounded by a ring of salt and what looked like dried herbs. The scent was overwhelming, sage and rosemary and something bitter Elena couldn't name. The sealed chamber, Mrs. Vale said, helping Elena guide Cassius to the bed. No sound escapes. No other vampire can enter without breaking the wards. It's where our kind go to face the long sleep in safety. Cassius collapsed onto the silk sheets, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Now, the transformation was visible, his skin taking on an almost translucent quality, his veins dark beneath like cracks in marble. Elena knelt beside him, still feeling that strange connection thrumming between them, growing stronger as he grew weaker. How long? Elena asked. 3 days, Mrs. Vale said. Maybe 4, depending on his strength. The first hours are the worst. The body begins to shut down completely. Heart stops. Breathing stops. To human eyes, he'll appear dead. But through the bond, you'll know he's still there, still fighting. And if the bond breaks, Mrs. Vale's expression hardened. Then he's lost. The soul has nothing to follow back. He'll remain in the long sleep forever, neither alive nor truly dead. A statue of what he was. Elena looked down at Cassius, at the man, the vampire who had offered her a way out of ruin and asked only that she be present for his dying. His silver eyes found hers, still lucid, despite the pain she could feel radiating through the bond. You can still leave, he whispered. The ritual is complete. You're bound to House Thorn now, the inheritance secured. You don't have to stay for this. Stop talking, Elena said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Save your strength. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Practical. I like that about you. Mrs. Vale moved to the door. I'll bring water, food, blankets. You'll need your strength too, child. The bond draws on both of you. She paused at the threshold. There's something else you should know. News reached us an hour ago. House Corvus has learned of the binding ceremony. Elena felt Cassius stiffen beside her. How? We don't know, but they're coming. Dorian estimates they'll arrive by dawn. Mrs. Vale's eyes were grave. They'll claim the timing is suspicious, that a deathbed marriage invalidates the succession. They've wanted control of House Thorn's territory for centuries. Let them come, Cassius said, but his voice was weakening. The wards will hold. Elena is safe here. The wards will hold the chamber, Mrs. Vale corrected. But the house below is vulnerable. If House Corvus brings enough force, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Elena's mind raced. What happens if they take control? They'll contest the binding, Mrs. Vale said. Argue that a mortal bride has no authority to hold a house during the elder's incapacity. They'll demand the estate, the territory, the vaults, and if they succeed, she looked at Cassius, they'll simply wait for him to wake, and then kill him while he's still weak from the transition. No, the word came out harder than Elena intended. She stood, her hands still gripping Cassius's cold fingers. How do we stop them? Mrs. Vale studied her with new interest. You can't. You're human, child. You have no standing in vampire politics, no power to. I'm his wife, Elena interrupted. By human law and by your ritual. Doesn't that mean anything? In theory, yes. In practice, Mrs. Vale shook her head. House Corvus respects strength, not ceremony. Unless you can demonstrate that you're capable of holding authority, of protecting what's been entrusted to you, they'll simply sweep you aside, through the bond. Elena felt Cassius trying to speak, trying to protest. But his body was failing faster now, his chest barely rising, his skin growing colder by the moment. He had minutes, maybe, before the full transition took him. Elena made her decision. Tell Serafini and Nathaniel to prepare to receive House Corvus as guests, not invaders, she said. Formal welcome, full protocol, whatever that means for your kind. Mrs. Vale's eyebrows rose. You want to welcome them? I want to control the encounter. Elena's mind was working now, calculating the way it had when she'd managed her father's finances, when she'd tried to negotiate with debt collectors. She was good at this, reading situations, finding leverage, playing with the pieces she had. If they come expecting a fight and find diplomacy instead, it gives us the advantage. Time at least. Time for what? For me to figure out how to prove I can hold this house until Cassius wakes. Elena looked down at him, at the vampire, who was now completely still, no breath moving his chest, no pulse visible in his throat. Through the bond, she still felt him distant now, falling deeper, but present. Alive. In whatever way vampires were alive. He chose me for a reason. Maybe just desperation. Maybe something else. But I won't let his gamble fail. Mrs. Vale was quiet for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she smiled. You really are an odd creature, Elena Thorne. Most humans would be cowering or fleeing. You're strategizing. I've been fleeing my whole life, Elena said quietly. It never worked. Maybe it's time to try something else. Very well, Mrs. Vale moved to the door. I'll inform the others. But child, she paused. House Corvus plays long games and plays them brutally. Their leader, Lucian Corvus, is older even than Cassius and far more ruthless. If you face him, you face centuries of cunning wrapped in perfect manners. Then I'll be cunning too, Elena said. And I'll have something he doesn't. What's that? Elena looked at Cassius's still form, felt the thread of connection between them pulsing with stubborn life. Nothing to lose. I walked into that alley with nothing. Everything from this moment forward is borrowed time and borrowed power. That makes me dangerous, Mrs. Vale laughed, the sound sharp and genuine. Oh, Cassius chose well, better than he knew. She slipped through the door. I'll return in an hour. Don't let go of the bond, child. No matter what happens downstairs, you hold that thread. The door closed, leaving Elena alone with a vampire who looked dead but wasn't, in a sealed chamber at the top of a tower. With an enemy house approaching and 3 days of vigil ahead, she settled beside Cassius on the silk sheets, took his cold hand in both of hers, and held on, through the bond. She whispered into the darkness where he'd fallen. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Find your way back. And from the depths, impossibly faint, she felt his response. Don't let them hurt you. Don't you dare die on me. She thought back, then Elena Thorne, who had been Elena Cross just hours ago, prepared to face her first dawn as a vampire's wife. Chapter 6. The politics of blood dawn came without sunlight reaching the sealed chamber, but Elena felt it in her bones, a heaviness in the air, a sense of the world turning over into day. She had not slept. Every time she tried, the bond would flutter weakly, and panic would jolt her awake, certain that Cassius was slipping away. He lay perfectly still on the black silk, a beautiful corpse. His chest did not rise. His eyes did not move beneath their lids. If not for the thread connecting them, gossamer thin now. But present, Elena would have believed him truly dead. Mrs. Vale had returned twice during the night, bringing water Elena didn't drink and food she couldn't stomach. The second time, she'd brought news. House Corvus would arrive at sunset. 8 hours away. 8 hours to figure out how to save us all, Elena murmured to the silent room. No pressure. A knock at the door made her jump. Miss Elena? It was Dorian's voice, younger sounding than the others, almost hesitant. May I enter? Elena stood, her legs stiff from sitting. The wards allow house members through. I won't stay long. I just thought. He paused. You should know what you're facing. Elena opened the door. Dorian stood in the corridor, and in the dim light, she could see he looked barely 20, though his eyes suggested centuries. He held a leather-bound book, ancient and worn. The house histories, he said, offering it to her. Everything you need to know about our kind, our laws, our complicated relationship with House Corvus. Elena took the book carefully. Why help me? You don't know me. Dorian glanced past her at Cassius's still form. Because he saved me once, when I was new to this life and making terrible mistakes. Because House Thorne is the only family I have. And because, he met her eyes. Because you stood in that drawing room and negotiated terms with a vampire who could have compelled you to obey. That takes either courage or madness, and I'm hoping it's courage. Can he compel me? Not anymore. The bond makes you immune to his influence. To any vampire's influence, actually. It's one of the protections built into the ritual. Dorian leaned against the doorframe. That's going to matter tonight. Lucian Corvus is old enough to compel almost anyone, but not you. Elena opened the book. The pages were yellowed, the script archaic but readable. She saw chapter headings, the formation of houses, laws of territory, rights of the mortal bound, the long sleep and succession. How much time do I have to read this? Not enough. Dorian's smile was rueful. But I can give you the essential points. Sit. They settled on the floor outside the chamber. Elena, unwilling to move too far from Cassius, and Dorian began to teach her the politics of immortality. Vampires organize into houses for survival, he explained. Alone, we're powerful, but vulnerable. Together, under an elder's protection, we control territory, resources, feeding rights. House Thorne holds this city and 3 others. House Corvus controls the coast. They've wanted our territory for centuries because it's richer, more populated, more humans to feed on, Elena said quietly. More humans to protect, Dorian corrected. That's what people never understand. A well-run house doesn't drain its territory dry. We feed carefully, consensually when possible, and we keep out the rogues who would turn humans into cattle. Cassius has always run a tight house. Corvus doesn't. Elena thought of the consent clause she'd demanded in the ceremony, the way Cassius had agreed without hesitation. So they're the bad guys? It's not that simple. They're ruthless, yes, but they'd say we're too soft to sentimental about mortals, that our mercy makes us weak. Dorian turned a page, showing her a diagram of vampire hierarchy. Normally, succession is clear. When an elder enters the long sleep, their second in command holds the house until they wake. But Cassius's second died 3 months ago. Hunting accident. Probably not an accident. Corvus killed him? We suspect, but can't prove. It left us vulnerable. If Cassius had entered the long sleep without a binding ceremony, Corvus could have claimed the house was leaderless and petitioned the council for control. Dorian looked at her. That's why he needed you. A spouse, mortal or vampire, has legal standing to hold a house during the elder's incapacity. It's old law from before houses formed. From when vampires still married humans they loved, the last words hung in the air. Elena thought of Cassius in the alley, desperate and dying, offering marriage to a stranger. He doesn't love me. No, Dorian agreed. But the law doesn't require love. Only binding, witnessed and sealed. Which you did. He hesitated. The problem is proving you can actually hold the house. Corvus will argue that a human bride with no knowledge of our ways, no authority, no strength, is functionally the same as no leader at all. Then I need to prove them wrong. Elena's mind raced. What does holding a house actually mean? What are the duties? Protection of house members, management of territory, enforcement of feeding laws, resolution of disputes, and most importantly tonight the authority to speak for the house in council matters. Council? The gathering of all house elders or their representatives, when major decisions must be made. Lucian will demand an emergency council session tonight, arguing that your binding should be invalidated. Dorian's expression was grim. If he succeeds, Cassius will wake if he wakes to find his house dissolved, his territory claimed, and his people scattered. Elena stood, pacing the narrow corridor. Through the open door, she could see Cassius's still form, feel the fragile thread binding them. She'd agreed to this marriage for money, for escape. But somewhere between the alley and this tower, it had become something more. Not love, she barely knew him, but responsibility. Debt maybe. Or simply stubborn refusal to let ruthless vampires win. The council, she said slowly. They respect strength. What else? Cunning, age, power. Dorian watched her. Things you don't have. No, but I have something better. Elena turned to him. I have nothing to lose, and they have centuries of careful political games. That makes me unpredictable, dangerous, or dead very quickly. Maybe. Elena looked at the book in her hands. But I've been underestimated my whole life. By my father's creditors. By Marcus. By every person who looked at me and saw someone easy to use. She met Dorian's eyes. I'm tired of being underestimated. If Lucian Corvus wants a fight, I'll give him one. Just not the kind he's expecting. Dorian studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Nathaniel was right. You're either the best thing that's happened to this house in decades, or you're going to get us all killed. Why not both? Elena said, and was surprised to find herself smiling back. From the chamber behind her, she felt the bond pulse weak but steady, like a heartbeat in the dark. Hold on, she thought toward Cassius. I'm buying us time. The thread pulsed again. Whether it was acknowledgement or warning, she couldn't tell. Either way, Elena had 8 hours to learn centuries of vampire politics. And a sunset. Meeting with an enemy who'd been playing this game since before her country existed. She opened the history book and began to read. Chapter 7. The arrival of House Corvus. Sunset came like a held breath, releasing. Elena felt it through the bond, a shift in Cassius's distant presence, a slight strengthening as night claimed the world. Vampires were creatures of darkness. Even in the long sleep, they responded to the fall of day. She had spent the hours reading, absorbing what she could of vampire law and custom. Mrs. Vale had returned at noon with formal clothes, a black dress more severe than the burgundy one, with a high collar and long sleeves. House mourning colors, she'd explained. Technically, your husband is dying. Best to look the part. Now Elena stood in the entrance hall beside Serafini and Nathaniel, waiting. Dorian had taken a position by the door, his young face carefully blank. Mrs. Vale hovered near the stairs, a silent shadow. Remember, Serafini murmured, her voice low enough that only Elena could hear. Do not let Lucian touch you. Do not accept anything he offers, food, drink, a seat. And do not, under any circumstances, meet his eyes for longer than a moment. Why not? Because he's old enough to compel through eye contact, bond or no bond. Not commands but influence. Suggestions that feel like your own thoughts. Serafini's expression was tight. He's dangerous, Elena. More dangerous than you can possibly understand. The great doors opened before Elena could respond. A wind swept through, too cold for the season, carrying the scent of salt and old stone. And then they entered. House. Corvus was smaller than Elena expected, only 4 vampires, but their presence filled the hall like smoke, dark and choking. They moved with synchronized grace, apex predators in human skin. T their center walked Lucian Corvus. He was beautiful the way Winder was beautiful, stark and sharp and absolutely merciless. Taller than Cassius, with silver hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes the color of ice. He wore black, tailored perfectly to a body that suggested both violence and control. When he smiled, Elena saw fangs that were longer than Cassius's, less disguised. House Thorn, Lucian said, his voice a cultured purr. How kind of you to receive us. House Corvus. Nathaniel stepped forward, the formal greeting. You honor us with your presence. Do I? Lucian's gaze swept the hall, dismissing Dorian, pausing on Serafini and finally landing on Elena. His eyes widened fractionally. Ah, the mortal bride. How unexpected. I was told Cassius had bound himself in desperation, but I assumed it would be to one of his own kind. Elena felt the weight of his attention like physical pressure. She forced herself to meet his eyes for exactly 1 heartbeat before looking away. Not submission, she told herself, but strategy. Elena Thorne, she said, pleased. Her voice didn't shake. And you must be Lucian Corvus. Cassius has mentioned you. Has he? Lucian glided forward, and Elena understood why Serafini had warned her. His movement was hypnotic, drawing the eye, making it difficult to think of anything else. I wonder what he said. Nothing complimentary, I'm sure. He said you were persistent. Elena kept her gaze on his chin, just below his eyes. I believe the exact word was territorial. One of Lucian's companions, a dark-haired woman with cruel eyes, laughed. Lucian's smile sharpened. Cassius always did have a gift for understatement. Tell me, Elena Thorne, where is your husband? Surely he should be here to greet his guests. He's indisposed. Indisposed. Lucian tasted the word. What a polite way to say dying in the long sleep. Or is he already dead? It's so hard to tell with these transitions. Serafini hissed, a sound that raised the hair on Elena's arms. You overstep, Lucian. Do I? I merely express concern for a fellow elder. Lucian's attention never left Elena. The long sleep is so perilous. Many enter. Few wake. And without an elder, without proper leadership, a house can crumble so quickly. He took another step closer. Tell me, little mortal, do you even understand what you've bound yourself to? Do you comprehend the weight of holding a house? Elena's hands clenched at her sides. Through the bond, she felt Cassius stir, not waking, but responding to her distress, trying to surface through layers of death sleep. She pushed calm back along the thread. Stay down. I've got this. I understand enough, she said aloud. I understand that House Thorne's territory is secure, its succession clear, and its leadership, she paused, functional. Functional? Lucian's laugh was soft and terrible. You've been bound for less than a day. You know nothing of our ways, our laws, our customs. You're a child playing at authority while the real power lies comatose in a sealed chamber. He leaned in, his voice dropping. Tell me truly, Elena, what happens when I simply take what I want? When I walk up those stairs, break through those wards, and end Cassius's suffering before he wakes to face his weakness? The threat was naked now, and Elena felt House Thorne tense around her. Serafini's hand went to something at her belt, a weapon, perhaps. Nathaniel positioned himself between Lucian and the stairs. Even Dorian had moved, blocking another approach, but Elena stepped forward instead of back. "You won't," she said quietly. Lucian's eyebrows rose. "Won't I?" "No, because if you break the wards on a sealed long sleep chamber, you violate one of the oldest laws of vampire kind, the sanctity of transition." Elena had read that particular passage 3 times, memorizing it. "And violations bring council judgment, not just against you, but against House Corvus entire. Your territory would be forfeit, your people scattered." Silence fell over the hall. Lucian studied her with new interest, the cruel amusement fading into something more calculating. "You've been reading," he murmured. "How studious. But laws require enforcement, little mortal. Who would enforce this law? The council is evenly split. Half would support me. Half would support Cassius if he were awake to argue his case." He smiled. "But he's not. He's dying. And you? You're just a human woman playing at being something you're not." Elena felt anger spike through her, not her own anger. She realized with shock. But Cassius's, bleeding through the bond even in his death sleep. She grabbed hold of it, used it to fuel her courage. "Then call the council," she said, her voice ringing through the hall. "Demand your emergency session. Argue that a mortal bride has no standing. See what they decide." Lucian went very still. "You're challenging me to council judgment? I'm accepting your challenge. Isn't that what you came here for? To force our hand?" Elena spread her arms. "So let's do this properly. By law, by custom. Let the council decide if House Thorn stands or falls." "Elena," Serafini whispered urgently. "You don't know what you're. I know exactly what I'm doing." Elena locked eyes with Lucian for a full second this time, letting him see her conviction. "I'm calling your bluff. Either you believe you can win in council, or you don't. Either you respect vampire law, or you're just a bully who hides behind politics." For a heartbeat, Elena thought she'd gone too far. Lucian's expression turned absolutely cold, inhuman, and she saw the ancient predator beneath the civilized mask. Then he laughed, genuine and delighted and somehow more frightening than his anger. "Oh, Cassius," he said to the air. "You magnificent fool. You married a lioness disguised as a lamb." He stepped back, inclining his head to Elena with something that might have been respect. "Very well, Elena Thorne. Council it is. 3 nights from now, when the moon is dark. We'll see if your courage holds when you face the combined judgment of 5 houses." He turned to leave, his people falling in behind him. At the door, he paused. "One more thing, little lioness. Don't let your husband die. It would be such a waste to win this battle only to find there's nothing left worth claiming." Then House Corvus swept out into the night, leaving Elena shaking with adrenaline and terror and something that felt uncomfortably like triumph. Chapter 8. The weight of choicest moment. The doors closed behind House Corvus. Elena's legs gave out. She sank to the marble floor, her breath coming in sharp gasps, the adrenaline draining from her body like water through cupped hands. "You challenged him to council." Serafini's voice was flat, disbelieving. "You challenged Lucian Corvus to formal council judgment. I thought that's what you wanted." Elena managed. "Wanted? We wanted him to leave without breaking anything, without starting a war." Serafini crouched beside her, and for the first time, Elena saw something like fear in the vampire's perfect face. "Do you understand what you've done? The council convenes in 3 nights. 5 houses will sit in judgment: Thorn, Corvus, Ashwood, Nightshade, and Ravencroft. Each elder or their representative gets a vote on whether your binding is legitimate, and if they vote against us, then House Thorn dissolves. Our territory goes to Corvus. Our people scatter or bend the knee to him." Serafini stood abruptly. "And Cassius, if he wakes to nothing." Elena pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the trembling in her hands. "Then we make sure they vote in our favor." "How?" Nathaniel's voice was gentle but tired. "Child, you bought us time, yes. 3 nights, instead of immediate conflict. But you've also locked us into a game we cannot win. The other houses will vote based on political advantage, not justice. Ashwood hates us. Nightshade is neutral at best. Ravencroft might support us, if properly convinced. Then we convince them. Elena steadied herself against the banister. What do they want? The other houses? Dorian spoke up from his position by the door. Ashwood wants access to our southern feeding grounds luxury hotels, wealthy tourists. Cassius refused them years ago because they're sloppy, leave to many bodies. Nightshade wants an alliance through marriage one of their younger members to someone in our house. And Ravencroft. He paused. Ravencroft is old, even by vampire standards. What they want is chaos prevented. They vote for stability. Then we offer Ashwood training instead of territory, Elena said, her mind racing. Send them advisors. Teach them Cassius's methods so they can improve their own feeding practices. For Nightshade, we promise to consider the alliance after Cassius wakes no commitment, but possibility. And for Ravencroft, we demonstrate stability. Show them that House Thorn is stronger with me than without. Serafini stared at her. You're trying to negotiate with vampires who've been playing these games for centuries. Yes, Elena met her gaze. Because I'm the only one here who has nothing but 3 days of existence to draw on. No centuries of grudges. No old alliances to honor. I can offer them things you can't, because I don't know what I'm not supposed to offer. That's either brilliant or suicidal, Nathaniel murmured. Why not both? Elena echoed Dorian's words from hours ago, and was rewarded with a surprised huff of laughter from the young vampire. Mrs. Vale appeared from the shadows. The girl needs rest, and she needs to check on her husband. The bond has been strained tonight, I can see it on her. Elena had been trying to ignore the pull at the edge of her consciousness, the way the thread between her and Cassius felt stretched thin and fraying. Now that Mrs. Vale mentioned it, the sensation became overwhelming. He's slipping, Mrs. Vale said. The stress of tonight, your fear, it all bleeds through the bond. He's trying to surface, to protect you, and it's pulling him toward waking before his body is ready. You need to go to him, now. Elena didn't wait for further explanation. She ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, her borrowed shoes clattering against marble. Behind her, she heard Serafini say, she'll never survive the council, and Nathaniel's quiet response, perhaps. But she survived Lucian Corvus. That's more than most mortals manage. The sealed chamber felt colder than before, the candles burning lower. Cassius lay as she'd left him, perfectly still, perfectly dead. But through the bond, Elena felt turbulence, his consciousness rising like a drowning man clawing for air. She fell to her knees beside the bed, taking his hand. His skin was ice. Stop, she whispered. Cassius, stop trying to wake up. I'm fine. I'm safe. You need to stay under. The thrashing in, the bond didn't ease. Elena closed her eyes, focusing on the connection between them. She'd spent the day feeling it passively, but now she reached for it actively, following the thread down into darkness. It was like diving into frozen water, shocking and disorienting. She felt his presence below, fighting, panicking, driven by some primal need to protect what was his. I'm not yours, she thought firmly along the bond. We agreed. Partnership, not possession. So trust me to handle this. The thrashing paused. I challenged Corvus to counsel, she continued. 3 nights from now. It might have been stupid, but it bought us time. Now you need to buy me your survival. Stay down. Finish the transition. Wake up strong enough to actually help. Instead of dying to protect me from a fight I can handle myself. Through the bond, she felt something that might have been surprise, or possibly admiration. It was hard to tell, with vampire emotions filtered through the strange magic connecting them. Then, slowly, his presence retreated. Not gone, never gone, but sinking back down into the healing darkness where he needed to be. Elena sagged with relief, her forehead resting against their joined hands. Stubborn, she murmured. You're so stubborn. Most vampires are. Elena's head snapped up. Mrs. Vale stood in the doorway, carrying a tray with tea and bread. He'll listen to you now. The bond proved itself. You can actually reach him in the depths. That's rare. is it? Most mortal bindings are one way. The vampire draws on the mortal's life force, uses them as an anchor, but there's no real communication. What you just did, talking him down, convincing him to trust you, that requires mutual connection. Mrs. Vale set the tray on a small table. It means he chose better than he knew. Or you're stronger than you look. Elena accepted the tea gratefully, the warmth steadying her. Mrs. Vale, what happens if we lose at council? The older woman was quiet for a moment. You'll be released from the binding. The marriage dissolved. You'll get nothing, no inheritance, no protection. And you'll need to leave vampire territory immediately, for your own safety. And Cassius? If he wakes, he'll be homeless, powerless, hunted by Corvus. Mrs. Vale's expression was grim. He'd probably choose to return to the long sleep permanently, rather than face that existence. Elena looked at Cassius's still face, thinking of the vampire who'd offered marriage to a stranger, who'd promised her freedom, even while binding her to his fate, who'd agreed to her terms without hesitation, who'd tried to wake from death's sleep because he felt her fear. Then we won't lose, she said quietly. Mrs. Vale smiled, sad and knowing. You care about him, already, after one night. I care about not failing. Elena drank her tea. It's different, is it? Elena didn't answer. She wasn't sure anymore. She spent the rest of the night reading the house histories, learning vampire law, and holding Cassius's cold hand while the bond between them pulls steady and sure. 3 nights until council, 3 nights to learn enough to save them both. Outside the sealed chamber, dawn came again, and Elena Thorne, mortal bride to a dying vampire, began to plan for war. Chapter 9. Lessons in Darkness. Second day passed in a blur of preparation. Serafini drilled Elena on house politics, who owed whom favors, which grudges stretched back centuries, the subtle hierarchies that determine everything from speaking order to seating arrangements. Nathaniel taught her the formal language of council proceedings, phrases in the old tongue that carried weight and meaning beyond their literal translation. But it was the second night, when the others had retreated to their rest, that Elena learned the most important lessons. She sat in the sealed chamber, reading by candlelight, when she felt the bond shift. Not the panic thrashing of before, but something gentler, a tentative reach, like someone tapping on a door. Elena set down her book. Cassius? No verbal response, but the bond pulsed with affirmation. He was still deep in the transition, still technically dead, but some part of his consciousness had surfaced enough to communicate. Are you in pain? She asked. The response came as sensation rather than words. Discomfort, cold, distance, but manageable. Elena moved closer to the bed, taking his hand. Through the bond, she felt his awareness sharpen at the contact. The council is tomorrow night. I've been learning everything I can, but, she hesitated. I'm terrified I'll say something wrong, that I'll use the wrong title or break some rule I don't know exists, and they'll use it as an excuse to vote against us. Show me, came the impression through the bond. What you've learned. Elena closed her eyes, focusing on the connection. She began to recite what Nathaniel had taught her, the formal greetings, the protocols, the hierarchy of address. As she did, she felt Cassius listening, and occasionally a gentle correction would flow back. Not Ashwood's elder. Say ancient of Ashwood, they're particular about the distinction. It became a strange dialogue. Elena, speaking aloud while Cassius responded through feelings and impressions that somehow conveyed entire concepts. She told him about Lucian's visit, and felt his mixture of pride and concern. She explained her plan to negotiate with the other houses, and felt his surprise at her political instincts. Did you know? Elena asked finally. When you chose me in that alley, did you know I could do this? No, the impression was clear. I knew you were desperate. I knew you were brave enough to get in a stranger's car during a storm. I hoped you were stubborn enough to not run at the first sign of what I was. Why me though? Why not find one of your own kind? Another vampire? The response came slowly, layered with old grief, because binding requires trust, and I have trusted my own kind before. They disappointed me, betrayed me. I thought, a mortal with nothing to gain from treachery might be safer. Cynical, Elena murmured. Practical, he corrected. And she felt his amusement ripple through the bond. Elena found herself smiling despite everything. You know, for a centuries-old vampire who should terrify me, you're surprisingly surprisingly what? I don't know. Human? She squeezed his cold hand. Present, real. I keep expecting you to be this distant, alien thing, but through the bond, you feel like someone I could actually know. Silence from his end, and Elena worried she'd said something wrong. Then, that is the danger of the bond. It strips away pretense. You feel what I feel, the loneliness, the weariness, the hope I barely dare to have. Most vampires guard those feelings carefully. But with you, you can't hide them, Elena finished. I'm sorry. That must be invasive. No, his response was fierce, almost startling. It is. Relief. I have worn masks for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be known. Elena's throat tightened. She thought of her own masks, the daughter who pretended her father's gambling didn't hurt her, the fiancée who convinced herself Marcus truly cared, the woman who smiled while her world crumbled. I understand that. The mask wearing. I know you do. Cassius sent gently. I feel your wounds as you feel mine. That is what binding truly means, not ownership, but recognition. Two people seeing each other clearly in the darkness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the bond humming between them. Elena could feel him starting to tire, the effort of maintaining consciousness while his body rebuilt itself taking its toll. Tell me about vampire rules, she said, trying to keep him present a little longer. The weird ones nobody mentions. The ones I might violate by accident. His amusement returned. Ah, the unwritten codes. Over the next hour, Cassius taught her through the bond, not the formal politics Nathaniel had covered, but the smaller customs that could make or break social standing. Never refuse offered hospitality, but never accept it without acknowledging the debt. Never comment on another vampire's age unless they're showing it off. Never, ever ask about someone's turning. It was considered deeply personal, almost obscene. What about feeding? Elena asked hesitantly. You said your house has rules about consent. We do. His response carried weight. Some houses see humans as cattle. We see you as companions, partners in the ecosystem. We feed, yes we must, but with permission, with care, with limits. A skilled vampire can feed without causing pain, without leaving damage beyond a day's dizziness. Have you ever killed while feeding? He didn't flinch from the question. Yes, in my first years, before I learned control. And once more, much later, when I found someone who preyed on children. I granted myself that kill. Elena should have been horrified. Instead, she found herself asking, did it bother you? The child predator? That I killed him? No, that I enjoyed it? Yes. His honesty was disarming. You're not what I expected monsters to be. We are not monsters, he sent, and she felt genuine pain beneath the words. We are predators, yes. But we are also people capable of love, of loyalty, of choosing to be better than our hungers. That is what House Thorn has always tried to teach. That is what Corvus would destroy. If they take control, they feed differently. They feed without consent, without care. And they make new vampires carelessly, turning humans who aren't ready, who never asked, who become rogues and killers. His anger pulls through the bond. That is why this matters, Elena. Not just for me, but for everyone in our territory. Corvus would turn this city into a hunting ground. Elena understood, then truly understood what she was fighting for. Not just Cassius's life or her own safety, but for thousands of humans who didn't know they were protected by careful laws and an elder who believed in restraint. Then we'll win, she said firmly. Tomorrow night, at council, we'll show them House Thorn is worth preserving. We? His question was gentle. Yes, we. You're not alone anymore, Cassius. You bound yourself to me, remember? Partnership, not possession. That means I fight for us both. The bond flooded with emotion, gratitude, hope, and something else Elena couldn't quite name. Something warm and fierce and terrifying in its intensity. Then Cassius's presence began to fade, sinking back into the healing darkness. But before he went completely, one last impression came through. Thank you, Elena Thorn, for being brave enough to stay. Elena sat alone in the candlelit chamber, holding the hand of a vampire who was learning to trust, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Tomorrow night, she would face the council, and she would win, not just for the inheritance, not just for safety, but for the wounded. Ancient creature who'd offered her a way out and asked only for witness in return. Outside, the night deepened toward dawn, and Elena began her final preparations. Chapter 10. The council's judgmental council convened in the oldest part of House Thorne's estate, circular chamber carved from stone that predated the mansion above it. Elena descended the spiral stairs, flanked by Serafini and Nathaniel, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wore black velvet, severe and formal, with the silver ring Cassius had given her gleaming on her finger. The chamber was lit by hundreds of candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on walls etched with symbols older than any language Elena recognized. 5 thrones stood arranged in a circle, ancient wood and stone, each distinct in style and ornamentation. 4 were occupied. Lucian Corvus sat in the east, his silver hair gleaming, his ice-blue eyes tracking Elena's entrance with predatory interest. To his left sat a woman who could only be Lady Ashwood, dark-skinned and regal, with gold adorning her throat and wrists, her gaze calculating. Across from Lucian lounged a thin, androgynous figure Elena recognized from her studies as MX, Nightshade, their expression bored and faintly amused. And in the north sat Lord Ravencroft, oldest of them all, his face so lined it looked like cracked porcelain, his eyes milky white, but somehow still seeing. The 5th throne, House Thorne's seat, stood empty. Elena Thorne, Lucian said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. How kind of you to join us. Though I notice your husband is conspicuously absent. Elena moved to stand before the empty throne, refusing to show fear. Cassius Thorne is in the long sleep, as you well know. I stand as his representative, and his wife, recognized by both human law and vampire custom. Do you? Lady Ashwood leaned forward, her voice rich and skeptical. You've been vampire-bound for 3 nights, child. I have servants older than your binding. What makes you qualified to speak for House Thorne? The law, Elena said simply. The same law that's governed vampire succession for 1,000 years. A spouse, mortal or immortal, holds authority during an elder's incapacity. I didn't write that law. I'm simply claiming what it grants me. Claiming rights and exercising them are different matters. MX. Nightshade's voice was soft, almost musical. Lucian argues your binding was opportunistic, a dying vampire desperate enough to marry a stranger, a mortal desperate enough to accept. He suggests this undermines the spirit of the law, which was designed for established partnerships, not convenience marriages. Elena felt the trap closing. This was the argument she'd known was coming, the one that was hardest to counter because it was partially true. She and Cassius barely knew each other. Their marriage was strategic, not romantic, but through the bond. Even in the depths of his transition, she felt Cassius stirring, listening, trusting her to find the words. You're right, Elena said, and watched surprise flicker across several faces. Our marriage was born of desperation. Cassius needed a bride to survive the long sleep. I needed escape from debts that would have destroyed me. We made a bargain clean and clear, as he said. You admit it then, Lucian said smoothly. This was transaction, not legitimate binding. I admit it began as transaction. Elena stepped closer to the center of the circle. But in 3 nights, I've learned something. Binding isn't about how it starts, it's about what you do with it. She looked at each elder in turn. I could have run after the ceremony. I could have taken the legal protection of the marriage and left Cassius to face the long sleep alone. No one would have stopped me. Why didn't you? Lord Ravencroft's voice was like wind through dry leaves. Because I gave my word, Elena said simply. Because he trusted me with his vulnerability, and I don't betray trust lightly. And because, she paused, feeling the bond pulse with attention. Because in 3 nights, I've seen what House Thorne stands for. Feeding laws that protect humans. Training that prevents rogues. A vampire elder who believes in consent over compulsion. She fixed Lucian with a steady gaze. If House Corvus takes this territory, those protections disappear. You all know it. The question isn't whether I'm qualified, it's whether you're willing to sacrifice human lives for political convenience. Bold words, Lady Ashwood said. But House Corvus offers us advantages too. Access to coastal trade routes. Alliance with their extensive network. What does a mortal bride offer that competes with that? Stability without debt, Elena said. She'd prepared for this. House Thorn offers training to Ashwood's people, proper feeding techniques that reduce casualties and attention. No territorial concessions, but knowledge transfer that makes your own holdings more secure. Lady Ashwood's eyes narrowed with interest. To Nightshade, Elena continued, we offer possibility. Not commitment to marriage alliance now, but a promise that when Cassius wakes, we'll formally discuss it. Your house wants connection to Thorn's power we don't refuse. We simply ask for time. MX. Nightshade tilted their head, considering. And to Ravencroft, Elena turned to the ancient vampire. We offer what we've always offered. Careful stewardship. Protection of the old ways. A house that remembers why laws were created to keep us from becoming the monsters humans fear. Lord Ravencroft was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. You speak well, child, but Lucian raises valid concerns. Your husband lies dying. You are untested. How do we know you can actually hold this house through crisis? You don't, Elena admitted. You take it on faith. The same faith Cassius took when he married a stranger in an alley. The same faith I took when I bound myself to a vampire I'd just met. She spread her hands. I can't offer you centuries of experience or political sophistication. I can only offer you what I am, someone stubborn enough to stand here, brave enough to face you, and committed enough to fight for what I've been entrusted with. Silence fell over the chamber. The candles flickered, then Lucian laughed sharp and bitter. A pretty speech, but the council must vote. That is law. He stood, his presence commanding. I call for judgment. Does Elena Thorne have legitimate authority to hold House Thorne during Cassius's incapacity, or is the binding invalid? Lord Ravencroft stirred. I vote to uphold the binding. The girl shows wisdom beyond her years, and House Thorne's methods have kept peace for generations. One vote. MX. Nightshade smiled lazily. I vote to uphold the promise of future alliances. Intriguing, and I do so enjoy watching Lucian lose. To votes. Elena's heart soared. Lady Ashwood was quiet, her calculating gaze moving between Elena and Lucian. Training and feeding techniques, she said slowly. Full knowledge transfer. Not just basic instruction. Complete access to our methods, Elena confirmed. Then I vote to uphold. Lady Ashwood sat back. I prefer practical advantage to territorial expansion. 3 votes. It was decided. Lucian's expression went absolutely cold. Then I am outvoted. How disappointing. He looked at Elena and she saw murder in his ice-blue eyes. Enjoy your victory, mortal. But know this, Cassius will wake eventually. And when he does, we'll see if he thinks you worth keeping. Epilogue. Awakening dawn broke over House Thorne on the 4th day, and Elena felt it through the bond, a sharp pull, urgent and demanding. She'd been dozing in the chair beside Cassius's bed, exhausted from the council session. When the sensation jolted her awake, his chest moved, just once, a shallow, experimental breath, but it was movement where there had been none for 3 days and nights. Elena leaned forward, her heart racing. Cassius? His eyes opened. They were still silver, still inhuman, but brighter now, clearer, as if some film had been burned away. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, his expression distant, processing. Then his gaze found hers. You're still here, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Where else would I be? Elena reached for his hand. It was still cold, but no longer the absolute ice of death. You survived. The transition worked. Cassius sat up slowly, testing his body with the careful attention of someone expecting damage. His movements were fluid, powerful, more graceful even than before. The long sleep had transformed him, strengthened him, burned away whatever human weakness had lingered. He was fully vampire now, fully other. The council, he said suddenly. Lucian called for judgment. We won. Elena couldn't help her smile. 3 votes to 1. House Thorne stands. Your territory is secure. Cassius stared at her. Through the bond, she felt his shock, his disbelief, his wonder. You faced them alone. You convinced them. I had help. Serafini, Nathaniel, Dorian, they prepared me. And you? She squeezed his hand. You guided me through the bond, even while dying. We did this together. He stood in one smooth motion, moving to the window. Outside, dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold colors he could now only see through thick glass, never feel again. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my life, my house, everything I've built over centuries. You don't owe me anything. We had a contract, remember? Elena pulled the folded paper from her pocket, blood-stained and worn now. Marriage during your dying, inheritance upon your waking. The terms are fulfilled. Cassius turned to look at her, his silver eyes unreadable. So they are, which means, he paused. You're free to leave. Take the inheritance, it's yours by right. Return to the mortal world. Live the life that was stolen from you. Elena had known this moment would come. She'd thought about it during the long hours of vigil, during the terrifying council session, during every quiet moment when she'd held his hand and felt the bond pulse between them. She could leave, return to humanity with enough wealth to solve every problem that had driven her into that alley. Start over, clean and safe and free. But she thought of Lucian's parting words. We'll see if he thinks you worth keeping. Is that what you want? Elena asked quietly. For me to leave? Cassius was silent for a long moment. Through the bond, she felt him wrestling with something, desire warring with honor, need warring with the promise he'd made. What I want, he said finally, is irrelevant. I promised you freedom. I won't bind you to this life, this darkness, unless you choose it freely. Then ask me to stay. His breath caught an unnecessary gesture, but telling. Elena, ask me, she repeated, moving closer, not as a command, not as house politics or ritual obligation, as Cassius, the vampire who married a stranger and learned to trust her. Ask me to stay. I can't. His voice was strained. You don't understand what you'd be choosing. This world is dangerous, Elena. Political, violent, endless. You would age while I remained frozen. You would die while I continued. I would watch you wither and unless I didn't, Elena interrupted. Unless I chose transformation, became one of you. The words hung in the air between them. Cassius's eyes widened. No, absolutely not. I won't turn you. I won't take your humanity, your mortality, your what if I want to give them. Elena stood before him now, close enough to see the subtle changes the long sleep had wrought, his features sharper, his presence more commanding, but still recognizably him. What if I'm tired of being fragile? What if 3 nights of vampire politics taught me I'm good at this better than I ever was at being human? You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Explain it. Give me all the terrible truths. Elena lifted her chin. I've faced debt collectors, a con man, Fiank, and the Council of Vampire Houses. I think I can handle honesty. Cassius studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he began to speak. Transformation is agony. 3 days of feeling your body die and rebuild itself. You'll never taste food again, never feel sunlight, never bear children. You'll watch everyone you've ever known age and die while you remain unchanged. You'll develop hungers that horrify you, not just for blood, but for power, for control, for the hunt. His voice dropped. And you'll be bound to me. Not by ritual this time, but by blood. I would be your sire. You would feel my emotions, my commands, my nature shaping yours for decades until you grew strong enough to be fully yourself. But I would be strong, Elena said. Powerful. Able to protect what I care about. Able to stand beside you as true partner, not as mortal wife, who'll die in a blink of your existence. Is that what you want? Power? No, Elena shook her head. I want choice. I want to stop being the victim of other people's decisions, my father's gambling, Marcus's betrayal, Lucian's politics. I want to be someone who can't be threatened or manipulated or destroyed by circumstances. She met his eyes. I want to be your equal, Cassius. Not your responsibility. Through the bond, she felt his resistance crumbling, felt the loneliness of centuries crashing against the impossible hope that she might truly stay. Forever. If I do this, he said slowly, If I turn you, we do it right. You learn everything first. Our laws, our customs, our history. You meet other vampires. See what this life truly means. And if you still choose it after a year, then I'll consider it. A year? Elena smiled. That's a very human time frame for someone who just survived the long sleep. A year, to be certain. Because once it's done, Elena, there's no going back. You'll be vampire forever, or you'll be dead. There's no middle ground. Elena considered his terms. A year of learning, of understanding, of certainty. It was fair. More than fair. Agreed, she said. 1 year. I'll remain as your mortal wife, learn your world, and if I still want transformation at the end, she held out her hand. You'll grant it. Cassius took her hand, his grip strong and sure. You are either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Why not both? Elena grinned, and through the bond felt his laughter genuine. Delighted, free, he pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Thank you, he whispered, for staying, for fighting, for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for offering me a chance when I had nothing, Elena replied. For trusting a stranger in an alley. For being the first person in years who kept their promises. They stood together as dawn fully broke, the bond between them humming with possibility. Outside house, Thorne was waking Serafini, Nathaniel, Dorian, Mrs. Vale, all the people Elena had fought to protect. This was her house now, her family, her choice, and in a year, if she still wanted it, she would become truly part of it, immortal, powerful, endless. But for now, Elena Thorne held her vampire husband's hand and watched the sunrise through sealed windows, content to be exactly what she was, mortal, brave, and finally free. The long sleep was over. Their true partnership was just beginning.